Watson. I'm here with Steinway Piano Gallery of Houston. Welcome to our River Oaks showroom. You'll notice on this wall we have almost every model that Steinway makes. They make 6 different sizes. So the one all the way to the back with that exotic wood is the smallest size. That's a baby grand. It's a 5'1", and then it keeps increasing to a 5'7", 5'10", 6'2", and then these 2 models are 7 feet, Model B. So that's what Daniel will be playing on today. And he got to choose from 2 to select. So as you can see, this is the one we'll be listening to today. We actually have a second showroom downtown right by Jones Hall on Louisiana and Prairie. So if you like listening to live music, specifically pianists, that is what that location is dedicated to presenting. And it's free, open to the public, so you can find me after. I have some cards. You just email me the email you'd like to add to that list, and you'll get automatic invites. Our next concert is in late September. So this is a family-owned business. We've been around since the 90s. We have Dallas, Plano, Fort Worth, and Houston. And there are only 2 selection centers in the world. Daniel got to practice at one of them, which was at our downtown location, and the other one is in New York City. So Houston is a really big hub for piano. People don't necessarily realize that we're actually the top Steinway Grand sales against LA and New York. So it's a fun job, and it's incredible getting to meet such talented artists and people who have dedicated their livelihood to creating music at the piano. So let's see, I'll say a little bit about the piano that Daniel will be playing today. When we talk about the size of pianos, they're measured from the center of the keyboard straight back, and that's what measures at 7 feet. Every piano is just under 5 feet because they all have 88 keys. This piano is special because it has on the bottom right here the name Spirio. These 2 both have the word Spirio, like the word spirit but with an O. And this is Steinway's newest technology. It came out in 2016, and it's the first time Steinway ever allowed technology to be married to a handcrafted instrument. So Steinways are still made in the US, in New York City. You can get public tours if you're there. I have some family that is from New York here. Every Tuesday they do public tours of the factory. And for one Steinway, it takes 1 year to make. It's handcrafted, and it takes 200 hands to make it. So we only make about 1,200 Steinways a year, and what you see, majority is 90% black, and then any of the brown, or there's sometimes white, those are going to be about 2% of the piano population when it comes to finishes. So in general, black is the most popular and therefore the least expensive. So the more exotic the wood, or the more out there the color, like Lady Gaga has a pink one with butterflies, that's going to be a little more expensive. So let's see, the Spirio is about $20,000 to $30,000 of technology, just the technology alone. And as the Steinway is being built, the technology is embedded in the instrument. This is Daniel's first time playing on a piano that has a Spirio, and also his first time exploring the record feature, which this particular Steinway has. So the basic Spirio is an app, and if I go to the welcome page, it'll give you little thumbnails. It'll show you highlights like Disney, Queen, the Beatles, The Sky is the Limit, and it's just different features each month that are added. What's unique is that it's actually featuring Steinway artists who have flown to New York, recorded in the studio, and then we have access to their performance in the app. So it's a lifetime supply of music. It comes with an iPad, and it's as close as you can get to the real thing. So they actually record it on a Spirio, and we hear it back on a Spirio. This particular piano takes it to the next level, in that we can actually record. So if you wouldn't mind playing a few bars for me, I'll sit over here.
You have to tell me when you're going to start.
Yes.
Right.
You may begin.
step away, otherwise.
So I'm going to save that. And I want to hear it. Actually, I want to be able to save it and see it. So if I start at the beginning, there was a pause, so let me start. I'm just going to start at the beginning. So you can visually see the way Daniel performed. I had started it early. And we can hear it played back as well as visually see his pedaling and playing. It's like a work of art. Did it sound like him? Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. And to the piano. So I'm going to just do a quick little experiment, and let's just say, you know, Daniel, that was nice, but I want to change the key, okay, just for fun.
How about you move it up to G major?
So I'm just going to lasso, which is appropriate here in Texas, that they made a lasso for us. I'm just going to circle the front area, and I get to choose the velocity, the duration, the pitch. You might want it in a different key, but I just want it up 1/2 step. Okay, so I'm gonna just click 1/2, and I'm going to start at the beginning and press play and see if you guys hear a difference. I don't think I did the lasso right. Okay, lasso. And I should be able to press play. Okay. Let's try one more time. So I can choose one note to be the correct or wrong
I'm sorry, I
note.
didn't practice that very well.
So you can edit the pedaling, you can edit the pitch, you can edit the speed. Let's say you wanted to hear yourself played in slow motion to determine how even are your fingers on the right hand,
Why
for
are you
example,
supposed to
or the
do
left
that?
hand. And then you'll also notice it's color coordinated. So depending on how heavy he used the melody line for voicing, you'll notice it's a darker orange versus a lighter yellow. So this is called the Spirio R. It now gives pianists the ability to hear yourself live through the piano, unlike
Which, by the
audio.
way, is entirely rare. This is the first time in my life I've heard myself live, not on recording. Right? So when this happens, it's very eerie. We're not used to being this far away from the piano. So it's I'm very intrigued.
Good. So that's my little demonstration of our newest product. If you would like to learn more or follow me on my Steinway adventures, my Instagram is on the back of my card. It's My Way with Steinway. And you'll see some of today's features. And if you have any questions about pianos later today, you're welcome to find me. So who are we introducing next? All right, Christian, please come on up. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for being here. Absolutely.
So hi everybody. I really appreciate everybody being here at the last minute because we had this wonderful opportunity to have Daniel perform. As I was telling him at his screening, we just don't have musicians of his caliber here. We're a film festival. We don't do music documentaries very often. We don't get those opportunities. And in watching his film as he's performing work by David Del Tredici, it's just the most moving and rewarding experience just watching him play this music in front of the composer, who is himself very emotionally overwhelmed and deeply moved. So I've been looking forward to this. We have been working so hard to try to find him a piano to play, and I want to thank you.
What was the name of the first place we thought we would do on Friday? That bar?
Oh yeah, we tried to do a performance at Michael's Outpost, but unfortunately at the time we were looking to do it, there was a drag performance scheduled. It probably wasn't compatible.
It would have been fun.
Daniel's game, but anyway. So thank you, Amanda, so much for giving us this opportunity. And I encourage you to attend the festival. We end on Wednesday night at the Museum of Fine Arts. We're still running programs tonight and through Wednesday. And I do want to thank the Hollyfield Foundation specifically for giving us money to support programs and bringing artists such as Daniel here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. So, what's the name of the festival, Christian, just in case?
QFest.
QFest, yeah. So, good afternoon. I don't know how many of you are here through QFest. Some of you might be here through Amanda's email list or Facebook invite.
Some piano friends.
But just so that we're all on the same page, my name is Daniel Beliavsky, and this is my first time in Texas. Obviously, first time in Houston. So I am from New York City, but originally I'm from Milwaukee, and I've been a Steinway artist since about 2002 or 2003. I wish I could remember the day, but maybe you can look it up at some point, but something like that. And the reason I'm here in Texas is because I made a film about this composer whose name is David Del Tredici, who's now 82 years old. And the film is called Secret Music, and Christian and the staff at QFest were very kind to program it, which I tremendously appreciate. And if you caught what Christian said, is that music films are kind of a rarity at any film festival. But the film is about this composer, and it centers around the question that I never knew was even waiting for me when I started making the film. This is my second film, which is this composer is openly gay, and he asked me in the very beginning of filming to ask him about gay music. And that became the central theme of this project. Could there be a sexual identity tied to music, especially if it's music without words, which is complicated, to say the least. So the film took 7 years to make, and when I started sending it out to various film festivals, you can imagine that, while Christian can speak to this as a programmer, that it's tough to find a place for a film like this. It seems almost like a niche project. But some very brave festivals have programmed it, including QFest, and like I said, I'm very grateful for that. So the reason we're here today is because we tried to find a performance venue. As you said, what was the name of that bar again?
Michael's Outpost.
Michael's Outpost. And it didn't quite work out. And then at the very last minute, we had this big aha moment because I was here practicing just sort of parallel to my work at the festival. And I was practicing at the downtown location on Louisiana Street, right? Louisiana and Prairie. See, I'm getting my sense of direction here. And it was just such an amazing experience practicing in the showroom, and I had no idea that was the second in the country, by the way. And so then Christian said, well, why don't you ask Steinway if they can host a little performance? And I was thinking, how can we possibly do that 2 days before I have to fly out? I'm flying out this evening. And it turned out all right, because Amanda was game, and here we are. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do today is just have a very small, like mini recital, play some music for you, play some music by David Del Tredici, this composer I was mentioning, but I want to contextualize his oeuvre by playing music that is, at least in spirit, similar to his own. So I'm going to start with a piece by Franz Schubert, a 19th century composer. Now, Schubert was born in 1797 and he died in 1828. So if you do the math really quickly, he was very young when he died. He was 31 years old. And Schubert occupies a very interesting place in music history because he sits on the transition from late classical music, which is the music that belongs to Mozart and Haydn and early Beethoven, names that probably you know. And then he's also on the other side of classicism, which is early Romanticism, music of the 19th century. And there he is in line with late Beethoven and some of the early Romantic composers like Chopin, for example, or Schumann, or Liszt, or Wagner, or a little bit later on some of the opera composers like Donizetti and Bellini and Wagner. Or I said that, Wagner, Verdi. So Schubert is kind of on the fence. Where is he? Is he a classicist? Is he an early romanticist? And I want to play for you a piece that I feel demonstrates this dual identity, which ties into David Del Tredici, because I think that for a person who was born in the 1930s and grew up in 1950s and 60s America, especially because, like I said, he's an openly gay composer, for him, the question of identity was very important. And if you know anything about how gay people had to behave, if you will, in 1950s America, it was all very kind of like a dual identity. It was something that was hidden and could not be outspoken in certain communities, certainly across the country. And for Del Tredici, this composer, there was an element of this, that he was quiet about this publicly. But privately, of course, he expressed himself as anyone has the right to do and should. So I believe that this piece by Schubert kind of captures that identity, those questions. So this piece is one of his impromptus. It's the impromptu Opus 142, number 2, which has a very classical form. It's in the form of a minuet and trio. And a minuet is just a dance, it's a courtly dance. In fact, a minuet has a certain connotation as well. The connotation is of love. So I'm going to play for you a love dance. And it's followed by something called a trio, which is another type of minuet, but just usually has a 3-part texture. And then the opening minuet comes back. So let me prime you a little bit, just so you know what to listen for. So the opening sounds like this. This is the opening of the minuet. That makes sense. You can capture that pretty easily. The trio sounds like this. Contrast between these. And then, of course, after the trio, we come right back to that opening minuet. So that's what I want you to listen for if you're not too used to navigating these classical forms. So without further ado, this is the impromptu Opus 142, number 2 in A-flat major. Don't change any keys on me while I play, because I don't think I could handle doing this for more than like 2 measures. And one final comment, this piece was written in 1828, which was the final year of Schubert's life when he was dying of syphilis and its complications. Not a happy ending, but we won't dwell on that. Let's hear the music. easy to follow, right, once you know the form. Did you feel a sense of relief when the opening minuet came back? I did. There's a lot of tension built up in this middle trio, right? It's faster, it's much more dramatic, and this is, to me, a very good demonstration of that dual identity that Schubert is presenting in this piece, because the minuet is very almost innocent, almost, but that trio is wild, and that's the two sides of these music eras, right? The sort of control of classicism and the controlled chaos of romanticism, and I think it's displayed very, very well in that piece. Now, I should add that contemporary musicologists, that is, scholars who study music and history, believe that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Schubert himself was gay. And so, could this piece be a kind of musical manifestation of his personal identity? Maybe. It's impossible to know for certain, but it makes for a lot of interesting scholarship and debate. But I'll leave you to think about the meanings of that. So that's one example I wanted to show you. I have another piece that's, I'm kind of trying to build up until we get to David Del Tredici. So the other piece is a piece still properly in the 19th century, and this is a piece by the Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff was born in 1873, so you see we're moving forward in history. We're going to get to David, who was born in 1937. Just wait a little bit. And Rachmaninoff was born in Russia, and he died in California. He emigrated to the United States, and he lived in New York, then he was in Hollywood. It was a very exciting time for him, and he died in 1943. And the piece I have to play for you is actually a very youthful piece. It's one of his early pieces that he composed at the age of 19. So that would be in 1892. And this is a very well-known piece if you know piano repertoire. It's the C-sharp minor prelude, and it's often called the Bells of Moscow prelude. Why bells? Well, why don't I talk about pianos just for a little bit? So the nice thing about pianos, big pianos, is that you can imitate a lot of effects on these instruments. For example, bells, right? So how would I create the suggestion of bells, or how did this composer Rachmaninoff suggest that? Well, these big octaves that, with pedal, can resonate throughout the space. So that's bell-like, correct? Now, there are other demonstrations I could give you. For example, how do you imitate other instruments? Well, going back to the Baroque era, the 18th century and the 17th century, there's a composer by the name of Domenico Scarlatti, and in his sonatas for harpsichord, which can certainly be played on the piano, you get the effects of trumpets. So tell me if you think this sounds kind of martial or military-like. What do you think? There's that kind of rhythm to it, and this sounds like trumpets. The strumming of a flamenco guitar. Right, so there are many effects that the piano can emulate. And again, don't change keys on me. That's my joke for today. So let me play for you this prelude by Rachmaninoff, The Bells of Moscow, written in 1892. It's so well known that it was even popular during his own day. And Rachmaninoff was a pianist, he was a composer, he was a conductor, and from all of these activities in music, he even suffered a kind of nervous breakdown around the turn of the 20th century. And he went to a psychologist whose last name was Dahl, D-A-H-L, and this psychologist helped him through that very difficult time. And then, as a form of gratitude, Rachmaninoff composed his second piano concerto, which, did you tell me that the symphony is about to play some Rachmaninoff?
Yes, it's actually going to be at Methodist Hospital. They're doing, with the Texas Medical Center Orchestra, August 15th, around there, there'll be some Rachmaninoff.
Okay, maybe a piano concerto, maybe not.
Yes.
But if you look out for it, the second piano concerto in C minor is a kind of musical realization of Rachmaninoff getting through this very, very difficult period at the turn of the century. But before that, here's this prelude. you recognized at the beginning, came back in a kind of expanded, modified form at the end. So I'm playing pieces that kind of have the same three-part structure. It's called a ternary structure, ABA. Well, you've been waiting for David Del Tredici. Here he is. Well, so David is in New York, and by the way, Christian, something that he asked me to say, which I didn't on Friday, was he wishes he could have been there. That's it. But he has Parkinson's, and he's having trouble moving around right now, but he's in pretty good shape. He just doesn't like to have long travel. So I'm here by proxy as his representative, I suppose, which is a big honor for me, actually. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to play for you one piece. In fact, for those of you who saw the film, this is the piece with which the film ends. It's called, in case you're curious if any of you read music, perhaps, it's called The Ballad in Yellow. And the reason I'm showing this to you, I actually very rarely show music to my audiences because I wouldn't want them to know any mistakes that I'm making. But right here, it says, after Lorca. Right, so Gabriel Garcia Lorca was a poet, a writer, and something that's very special to this composer's output is that he writes a lot of songs, specifically that is music for instruments and singers. And this piano piece is actually originally a song. So what I'd like to do is I want to read for you the program note at the very beginning of this album, which David himself wrote. And let me just read this directly for you. So The Ballad in Yellow is a 1997 transcription of a song I wrote to a Garcia Lorca poem. The pianist-composer Robert Helps, who was very important in David's life, upon hearing the premiere of the song, said to me, "I wish, David, that the song was a piano solo. I'd love to play it." The moment he said this, I realized that a piano arrangement would require little alteration. I simply removed the vocal line and added a more pianistic ending. Needless to say, the piece is dedicated to Robert Helps, who played the premiere. So this piece is much more recent than, let's see, we had Schubert from 1828, the Rachmaninoff from 1892, and now this piece from 1997. So we're inching closer to the present day. Now this piece is in fact for piano solo, but that doesn't mean that you won't be able to hear the vocal part. So let me just, again, as I've been doing with the other pieces, just by way of kind of guiding you, before I play it in full, I just want you to hear where the voice would have been. Especially if you're a singer, maybe this is something that would interest you. So it begins with kind of a piano vamping, right? So it sounds like this. That's just the piano part, and then the singer comes in, and see if you can hear it all the way at the top of the keyboard. You can hear that line? So the voice is present, and there's a huge tradition of piano pieces that are essentially vocal pieces without the singer, and they're called vocalises. Schubert wrote one. Here's that example. Do you remember what I played at the very beginning when we were just demonstrating the Spirio, this piece? Now that you're kind of primed to listen for it, can you hear the voice all the way at the top? Present in a lot of piano music, and that's why, at least going back to the 19th century, there's a tradition of teaching pianists to play as though they're singing, which is very strange with this given instrument because this is a drum. It's a big percussion instrument, right? You kind of bang away at it, right? Which is not particularly vocal. But to make this percussion instrument or percussive instrument sound like a voice is what pianists train to do. So without further ado, let me play this piece for you, and then what I'd like to do is just open up the conversation. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask me about, I'll be happy to address them. So here's that piece, Ballad in Yellow, and I hope you enjoy it. So that was the Ballad in Yellow, and it's a very lush piece, isn't it? It's a gorgeous piece of music. And when I shot the scene in the film with this performance, which was really kind of it was a rehearsal that was on tape, basically filmed. And David worked with me, the composer worked with me on this, and then I proceeded to play it again, and taking in all of his comments and suggestions. And what I said during the Q&A after the film screening was that, and Christian alluded to this in his introduction, was that David was very moved by the fact that I could incorporate all of his changes right away. And that's something I learned with him. If you're ever lucky enough to work with an artist and you're trying to realize his or her works, then it's an incredible thing to see the artist moved by what you've done. And David was essentially crying on set. And what I said again during the Q&A was that we all felt it. The crew, the people in front of the camera, the people behind the camera, and we just hoped that the camera had caught the intensity of those emotional moments. And I think it did. Christian, you saw it. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he could barely speak at first. There's that moment of, you know, as everything kind of, as reality came crashing back, as it sometimes does after a piece of music or a piece of art performed. So that's my presentation for you. I want to thank Amanda first and foremost for opening up a space for this to happen. And of course to Christian and Jay in the back for QFest. It means a lot to me to be able to perform in two ways, actually. You know, as my avatar on screen, and then as myself live. And then if you play this without me present, it's a third level that's very confusing. I don't really know what to make of it, but I'll have to think about that one. But I want to ask you if you have any questions or comments. Yes.
Does David Del Tredici mention what kind of poem this is? What's the subject?
Yes. I feel terrible that I didn't bring the original poem with me. I can certainly look it up if you wish another time, maybe later after we disperse.
And is that the translation of the
It's the English translation. It's called The Ballad in Yellow, and essentially it's kind of about. It's very hard to summarize the poem, but essentially it's concerning nature and stars and walking underneath the stars. It's very, again, pastoral. It's a pastoral piece of poetry. And I think that kind of lushness that you hear in the music is a pretty accurate reflection of the content of the poetry. I'm sorry I'm being so vague.
What was the original language?
It was Spanish. Yeah. So, sorry not to be able to help you, but that's easy enough to look up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
I may have missed this, but what was the original instrumentation?
It was for piano and voice, and not to belabor this, but in a different key. So David kind of shifted it over to a more pianistic key. For those of you who care about such things, this is in D flat major essentially, and D flat is a key that has, well, here, let me reference Chopin. So a lot of my students, when I start working with them, and they're, let's say, beginners. Any beginner pianists in the room? Mm-hmm. I heard a couple of you warming up. So how many of you play scales? So that was C major. I don't know if you know this, but Chopin, who is regarded as a piano teacher, as much as a composer, as much as a performer, he didn't like his students starting off in C major. By the way, this is an appropriate answer to what you were asking me about. I'm taking the long route. So he preferred to have his students start in E major or B major, because in those scales, the longer fingers, right, the second, third, and fourth fingers, are extended further toward the front of the fallboard, that's what it's called, right? And they rest on the black keys. And it's more comfortable to play with your long fingers over the black keys than it is to play an entirely white key scale where your fingers are essentially like this, kind of claws closer to your body. So David, who is an amazing pianist, he started his career as a musician, as a pianist. He chose this key of D flat major because, again, if you watch what I'm doing, my longer fingers, these three, are over the black keys. So it's really very pianistic and very easy to play. Whereas when he wrote it for piano and voice, it was all about the register of the voice sitting properly, and not so much about the piano. I have not, no.
Interesting to
Yeah.
hear your feedback.
Well, next time let's come back with a singer, and then we'll make it happen. We can compare it right away. Any other questions I can? Yeah.
I have a super silly one. When you were working from the sheet music, you had it flat and not up. Was that?
There are different reasons. I can have it up too. I think the reason is because I just wanted to hear the full effect of the piano emanating from the inside of the piano. So with the desk down, I get more of that sound. If it's up, I actually hear it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It resonates a little bit differently. So it's just for that. And also for the challenge of, having all sorts of mishaps with the page, just in case. Is there anything else I can address? Well, in that case, thank you for having me, and thank you again to QFest. Thank you to Steinway. I appreciate it. Thank you.